The cafeteria buzzed with the usual chaos, shouting, laughter, the clatter of trays hitting tables. 16-year-old Emily Carter sat alone. As always, her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on her untouched sandwich. She had mastered the art of invisibility, of slipping through the halls like a ghost. Then came the slap. A stinging smack echoed through the room as a hand struck her backside. The laughter was instant, cruel, deafening. Emily's entire body burned with humiliation. Jake Larson, the school's golden boy, stood behind her, grinning like he'd just won another trophy. But this time, something inside Emily snapped. She turned slowly, her hands trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. And then, in a voice so quiet the entire cafeteria fell silent to hear it, she said, "Do that again. I dare you." Jake's smirk faltered. The crowd held its breath. What happened next would shock the entire school, expose dark secrets, and ignite a fire no one could control. Because something will happen next in this story that you would have never imagined. From which country are you enjoying this story? Make sure to tell us in the comments, and subscribe now, because you won't believe where this is headed. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The cafeteria buzzed with noise, a chaotic symphony of clattering trays, laughter, and overlapping conversations. Emily Carter moved through the crowd like a shadow, her shoulders slightly hunched, her grip tight around the brown paper bag that held her lunch. She had learned long ago how to make herself small, how to avoid drawing attention. It was easier that way, less painful. She found her usual spot at the far end of the table, the one tucked near the corner where no one else sat. The seat was scratched and worn, just like the routine she had perfected over the years. Eat quickly, keep her head down, leave before anyone noticed her. Today, though, the universe had other plans. She had just unwrapped her sandwich when she felt it. The sharp, stinging slap against the back of her thigh. The sound was loud enough to cut through the noise of the cafeteria, and for a single, horrifying second, everything seemed to freeze. Then came the laughter. Loud, mocking, unapologetic. Emily didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Jake Larson, star quarterback, golden boy, the kind of guy teachers smiled at and girls whispered about in the hallways. He had been making her life miserable since 7th grade, back when she had still been naive enough to believe that if she just ignored him, he would eventually get bored and leave her alone. She was wrong. The laughter swelled around her, a wave of humiliation crashing over her skin. Her hands trembled, her breath coming too fast. She could feel the heat in her face, the prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Run," a voice inside her whispered. "Just get up and run." But then, something else. A different voice, quieter but stronger. "No, not this time." Slowly, Emily turned in her seat. Jake stood a few feet away, grinning like he had just told the funniest joke in the world. His friends were all watching, waiting for her reaction. Would she cry? Would she bolt? Would she do nothing like always? She stood up. The laughter died down, replaced by murmurs. No one had expected that. Jake raised an eyebrow, still smirking. "What, Mouse? Got something to say?" The nickname burned worse than the slap had. Mouse. Small, weak, easy to ignore. Emily looked him dead in the eye. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I do." Silence. Then, before anyone could react, she turned and walked straight out of the cafeteria. But she wasn't running away. She was going to the principal's office. And this time, she wasn't leaving without being heard. The walk down the hallway felt longer than usual. Every step echoed in her ears, her pulse a relentless drumbeat. She could still hear the laughter ringing in her mind, still feel the sting on her skin. But beneath all of that was something new, something fierce and unshakable. She pushed open the door to the office, her hands no longer trembling. The secretary looked up, surprised. "Emily, is everything all right?" Emily took a deep breath. "No," she said. "It's not." And then she told her everything. The memories came flooding back as she spoke. The first time Jake had tripped her in the hallway. The time he had accidentally spilled his soda down her backpack. The whispers, the jokes, the way he and his friends had made sure she knew she didn't belong. She had never told anyone before. Not really. She had mentioned things in passing, shrugged it off when teachers asked if she was okay. But this time was different. This time, she didn't downplay it. She didn't make excuses for him. She told the truth. And when she was done, the secretary's expression had changed from polite concern to something darker. Something like anger. "I'll call the principal," she said quietly. Emily nodded. She knew this wasn't over. But for the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. The principal listened, really listened. He asked questions, took notes, his face growing more serious with every word. And then he did something Emily hadn't expected. He asked for proof. And Emily had proof, because she had been recording it. All of it. The phone felt heavy in her hand as she pulled it from her pocket. She had started recording after the last incident, after Jake had cornered her by the lockers and told her, in vivid detail, exactly what he thought of her. She hadn't planned to use it. She hadn't even known what she would do with the recordings. She just knew she needed something, some way to prove she wasn't making it up. Now, she hit play. The audio was clear. Jake's voice, dripping with mockery. His friends laughing. The sound of her backpack hitting the floor. And then, from today, the sharp slap. The eruption of laughter. The principal's face went still. Emily didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. By the end of the day, everything had changed. Jake was called out of class. His parents were called. The school board was notified. And Emily? Emily sat in the empty hallway, her knees pulled to her chest, trying to process what had just happened. She had done it. She had actually done it. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a mouse. She felt like a girl who had just found her voice. And she wasn't going to lose it again. Emily sat on the cold tile floor outside the principal's office, her back pressed against the lockers. The sharp smell of industrial cleaner filled her nose, mixing with the metallic taste of blood where she'd bitten her cheek too hard. Somewhere down the hall, a locker slammed shut, making her flinch. She hated how jumpy she'd become over the years, how her body reacted before her mind could catch up. The office door creaked open. Emily, Principal Harris, stood there, his tie slightly loosened, his forehead shiny with sweat. "Come in, please." The chair in front of his desk was still warm when she sat down. She focused on the framed degrees behind him, the dusty trophies lining the shelves, anything but the folder open on his desk with her name typed neatly on the tab. "First," he said, rubbing his temples, "I want to apologize. What happened today, what's been happening, should never have been allowed to continue." Emily's fingers dug into her knees. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, rehearsed what she would say. Now the words stuck in her throat like dry bread. Harris leaned forward. "I've suspended Jake pending further investigation. His parents are on their way." He paused. "Your parents should be here too. Have we called them?" The question sent a jolt through her. Her mother would be at work, elbows deep in someone's hair at the salon. Her father, well, who knew where he was these days? I can call my mom." As she reached for her phone, the office door burst open. Jake's father filled the doorway, his face the same shade of red as his son's Letterman jacket. "What the hell is this about, Harris? You suspended my boy over some little..." "Mr. Larson." Harris stood so fast his chair rolled back. "My office." Now, Emily shrank in her seat as the man's gaze landed on her. His eyes, the same icy blue as Jake's, narrowed. "You," he spat. "This you're doing?" The principal stepped between them. "That's enough. Emily, wait outside, please." The hallway was empty when she stumbled out, her legs shaky. She pressed her forehead against the cool metal of the lockers, trying to steady her breathing. From inside the office, raised voices leaked through the thin door. Just harmless fun. Sexual harassment. "That little bitch is lying." A hand touched her shoulder. Emily whirled around to find Ms. Alvarez, her art teacher, holding out a bottle of water. "Come with me," she murmured, steering Emily toward the teacher's lounge. The small room smelled of burnt coffee and microwave popcorn. Ms. Alvarez sat her down at the stained Formica table. "I heard what happened," she said, pushing the water into Emily's hands. "I want you to know, I believe you." Emily's vision blurred. No adult had ever said those words to her before. Not when Jake put glue in her hair in 8th grade. Not when he'd accidentally bumped her down the stairs last year. Not even when she'd shown up with bruises shaped like fingerprints on her wrist. The dam broke. The whole story came pouring out. The name-calling, the stolen homework, the way Jake's friends would corner her by the dumpsters after school. Ms. Alvarez listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When Emily finally ran out of words, the teacher reached across the table. "There's something you should see." She pulled out her phone and opened a school email chain from last semester. Subject line, "Concerns about bullying." Emily scanned the messages, 3 different teachers expressing worries about Jake's behavior. The last email, from Harris, read, "Let's discuss at next faculty meeting." He knew, Emily whispered. All this time, he knew. Ms. Alvarez's jaw tightened. Sometimes it takes one brave voice to make people listen. She squeezed Emily's hand. "You're that voice." Back in the hallway, the principal's door flew open. Jake stormed out, his face twisted in rage. When he saw Emily, he froze. For one terrifying second, she thought he might charge at her. Then his father grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the exit. "Don't worry about him," Harris said, emerging from the office. He looked exhausted. "Emily, I'd like to continue our conversation. There are some other students who may have stories to share." As she followed him back inside, Emily glanced at her reflection in the office window. The girl looking back at her stood taller than she remembered. The fluorescent lights in the principal's office hummed like angry bees as Emily sat across from Principal Harris. The leather chair creaked under her weight as she shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder on the desk between them. Inside were printouts of her recordings, not just from today, but weeks' worth of audio files she'd secretly collected. "You understand," Harris began, rubbing his temples. "This goes far beyond what happened in the cafeteria today." His tie was loosened now, the starch in his collar wilting like his professional demeanor. "There are procedures we have to follow, legal considerations." Emily's throat tightened. She'd expected immediate justice, not bureaucratic hesitation. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching as Harris flipped through the pages. A knock at the door startled them both. Ms. Alvarez entered with 3 girls Emily recognized from different grades. Sarah from her chemistry class, Quiet Mia from the yearbook staff, and freshman Rachel, who always ate lunch alone near the library. Their faces were pale, their eyes red-rimmed. "We'd like to add our statements," Sarah said, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. "If that's okay with Emily." The room seemed to tilt. Emily had never spoken to these girls before, never imagined they shared her secret shame. Sarah placed a stack of handwritten notes on the desk, while Mia pulled up photos on her phone. Images of ruined textbooks, cruel locker graffiti, a shattered phone screen. Rachel, the smallest of them, didn't speak. She simply rolled up her sleeve to reveal a fading bruise in the distinct shape of fingers. Emily's stomach lurched. She knew that particular shade of yellow-green. It was the same color her own arms had been last month. Harris's face drained of color. "Why wasn't I informed about any of this?" The girls exchanged glances. Sarah answered for them all. "We tried. Multiple times." She pulled a crumpled detention slip from her pocket dated months earlier. "Remember when you said boys will be boys?" The principal's pen clattered to the desk. Outside, the final bell rang, but no one moved. The sounds of lockers slamming and students cheering felt like they came from another world. Emily finally found her voice. "What happens now?" Harris straightened his tie with shaky hands. "Now," he said, reaching for the intercom, "we call the school board president and the police." The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed like trapped insects, casting a sickly glow over the scratched wooden table where Emily sat. Across from her, Detective Morales flipped open a notepad, her dark eyes missing nothing. The way Emily's fingers trembled around her soda can, the slight hitch in her breath when the door creaked open, the way she kept glancing at the clock like she expected Jake to burst in at any moment. "You're sure," Morales said, not unkindly, "that you want to move forward with this?" Emily's throat tightened. She had spent years making herself small, folding into the background like a shadow. Now, The weight of what she'd started pressed down on her, heavy as a stone. But then she thought of Rachel's bruise, of Mia's shattered phone, of Sarah's detention slip, crumpled like a secret she'd been forced to swallow. "Yes," Emily said. Morales nodded and clicked her pen. Hashtag the first interview. Sarah went first. She sat straight-backed in the hard plastic chair, her voice steady as she recounted how Jake had accidentally bumped into her in the hallway last semester, his hand lingering too long on her waist. How, when she told him to stop, he'd laughed and called her frigid loud enough for his friends to hear. "It wasn't just me," Sarah said, her nails digging into her palms. "He'd do it to other girls too, like it was a game." Morales' pen scratched across the paper. "Did you report it?" Sarah laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "To who?" "The teachers all said he was just being friendly. The principal said I was overreacting." Emily's stomach twisted. She'd heard those same words before. Hashtag the second witness. Mia was quieter, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look up as she described how Jake and his friends had stolen her sketchbook last year, passing it around the cafeteria while they laughed at her drawings. "They tore out the pages," she said, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "And when I tried to get it back, Jake shoved me into a locker." Morales frowned. "Was there anyone who saw this happen?" Mia hesitated. Then, slowly, she pulled out her phone and opened a video. The footage was shaky, filmed from someone's hidden perspective in the crowded hallway. But the audio was clear, Jake's mocking voice, the crunch of paper, Mia's choked sob as she hit the metal locker. Emily's breath caught. She wasn't the only one who'd been recording. Hashtag the breaking point. Rachel was last. She sat curled in on herself, her arms wrapped tight around her middle like she was holding herself together. She didn't speak at first. Then, in a voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear, she said, "He followed me home." The room went still. Emily's pulse roared in her ears as Rachel described how Jake had cornered her behind the bleachers after practice, how he'd grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise when she tried to pull away. "I told the coach," Rachel whispered. "He said Jake was just messing around." Morales' jaw tightened. "Did he ever?" "No." Rachel cut in, her voice firmer now. "But he would have, if I hadn't run." Emily's vision blurred. She thought of all the times she'd told herself it wasn't that bad, that she was overreacting, that she just needed to toughen up. She hadn't been the only one lying to herself. Hashtag the aftermath. By the time they left the station, the sky had darkened to a deep bruised purple. Emily's mother waited by the car, her face drawn with worry. "You okay?" she asked softly. Emily wasn't sure. Her body felt hollowed out, scraped raw. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Sarah fell into step beside her. "They're going to call more girls in tomorrow," she said quietly. "Apparently, Jake's got a list." Emily swallowed hard. "How many?" Sarah met her eyes. "Enough that they can't ignore it anymore." Hashtag the fallout begins. The next morning, Jake wasn't in school. Rumors spread like wildfire that he'd been arrested, that his family was lawyering up, that the football coach had resigned in protest. Emily kept her head down, but she noticed the way the hallway parted for her now. The way people looked at her, not with pity, but with something like awe. At lunch, a freshman girl she'd never spoken to slid into the seat across from her. "Thank you," the girl whispered before hurrying away. Emily stared after her, her chest aching. This wasn't over, but it was finally beginning. The first legal letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Emily's mother stood frozen in the doorway, the crisp white envelope trembling in her hands. The return address, *Larson and Pierce, attorneys at law, *, glared up at them like a threat. "They're suing," her mother whispered, "for defamation." Emily's knees buckled. She caught herself on the kitchen counter, the cold marble biting into her palms. The room tilted sharply, the cheerful yellow walls of their tiny kitchen suddenly suffocating. Her mother ripped the envelope open with shaking hands, scanning the contents. "They're demanding we retract all statements about Jake. They say if we don't, they'll pursue criminal charges for false accusations." The toast Emily had eaten for breakfast turned to cement in her stomach. Criminal charges. A lawsuit. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd told the truth. She'd had proof. But as her mother read on, the real horror emerged. The Larsons weren't just coming after Emily. They were targeting every girl who'd come forward. #, the school board meeting. The auditorium buzzed with tension. Emily sat between Sarah and Mia in the third row, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles blanched. The air smelled of cheap coffee and nervous sweat. Principal Harris stood at the podium, his usually crisp shirt wrinkled. "We've reviewed the allegations with our legal team," he began, avoiding eye contact with the cluster of girls in the front rows. Jake's father, his face thunderous, stood without waiting to be called on. "This is a witch hunt." His voice echoed off the rafters. "My son is an honor student, a star athlete. These..." He waved a dismissive hand at Emily and the others. "Girls are trying to ruin his future over some harmless teasing." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emily's skin prickled as dozens of eyes bored into her. Then a new voice cut through the noise. "Harmless." Ms. Alvarez stood, her usually warm eyes blazing. She marched to the podium and dropped a thick folder with a sound like a gunshot. "Harmless," she repeated, her voice shaking with fury. "Doesn't leave bruises." She flipped the folder open. Photos of Rachel's arm, Mia's torn sketchbook, security footage of Jake cornering Sarah by the lockers. The room went dead silent. The school board president, an elderly man with watery blue eyes, adjusted his glasses. "We'll need to investigate these claims." "Claims?" Sarah shot to her feet, her voice cracking. "We're not claiming anything. We're telling you what happened." A man in the back row stood. Emily recognized him as the football coach. "Jake Larson is one of the most respectful young men I've ever coached," he boomed. "I don't believe a word of this nonsense." The room erupted. Emily sat frozen as shouts volleyed back and forth. Asterisk liars. Asterisk victims. Due process. Justice. Until Rachel, tiny freshman Rachel, climbed on her chair. She didn't shout. She simply rolled up her sleeve. The yellowing bruise had faded to green, but the shape was unmistakable. 4 fingers and a thumb, pressed so hard in her pale skin they'd burst blood vessels. The silence was deafening. #, the media storm. By morning, the story had gone viral. Emily's phone blew up with notifications. Local news outlets, national blogs, even a producer from a major daytime talk show. The hashtag Justice for Emily trended alongside #I stand with Jake. Camera crews camped outside school. The Larsons gave a tearful interview about their good boy being persecuted. The football team wore Jake's number on their jerseys at practice. But then something unexpected happened. Messages began flooding in from strangers. "He did the same thing to me at his last school. My daughter went through this 2 years ago. I was too scared to say anything, but I have proof." Emily sat on her bedroom floor, scrolling through hundreds of similar stories, her tears dripping onto the screen. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. Her mother appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "The Larsons are holding a press conference tonight." Emily wiped her face. "We should hold one too." For the first time since this began, her mother smiled. #, the turning tide. The high school gymnasium was packed beyond capacity for the press conference. News vans from 3 major networks idled in the parking lot. Emily stood backstage with Sarah, Mia, Rachel, and 7 other girls who'd come forward that week, all holding hands like a chain of courage. Ms. Alvarez adjusted Emily's collar. "Ready." Emily thought of all the times she'd stayed silent. All the times she'd let them win. She stepped into the lights. The gymnasium lights burned hotter than Emily expected. She blinked against the glare, her palms slick against the edges of the makeshift podium. A repurposed music stand draped with a blue cloth. The murmur of the crowd rose and fell like ocean waves, punctuated by the occasional camera flash. To her left stood Sarah, her spine rigid, fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against her thigh. To her right, Mia clutched a stack of note cards with white-knuckled intensity. Behind them, a semicircle of girls, some Emily recognized from school, others complete strangers who had reached out after the story broke, formed a silent wall of solidarity. A reporter in the front row leaned forward. "Emily, what do you say to those claiming you're exaggerating these incidents?" Emily's throat tightened. She had practiced this moment in front of her bedroom mirror, but now the words jammed in her chest like broken glass. Then she felt it, a light pressure against her wrist. Rachel, standing just behind her, had reached out. The faintest touch, but it grounded her. Emily took a breath. "I'm not exaggerating," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I was scared. For years." She lifted her chin and looked directly into the nearest camera. "That ends today. Hashtag, 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 the testimonies." One by one, the girls stepped forward. Sarah spoke about the time Jake had playfully pulled her ponytail so hard she'd gotten whiplash, and how the nurse had dismissed it as boys being boys. Mia read aloud the hateful comments Jake's friends had written in her yearbook last June, her voice only breaking once. Then came surprises. A girl Emily didn't know, Lila from Eastridge High, Jake's previous school, described how he'd spread rumors about her in sophomore year that had gotten her ostracized. Another, a college freshman named Taylor, showed security footage of Jake groping her at a party when he was just 15. "His parents paid mine to keep quiet," she said, her mouth twisting. The room grew heavier with each story. Reporters stopped typing. Camera operators adjusted their lenses with unusual quiet. Emily watched the crowd's faces shift. Doubt to unease, unease to dawning horror. Then the gym doors banged open. Hashtag, 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 the interruption. Jake stood in the doorway, flanked by his parents and their attorney. The room erupted. Shouted questions collided with the screech of folding chairs as journalists scrambled for better angles. Jake's father started yelling about defamation, while his mother clutched her son's arm, her designer sunglasses failing to hide her panic. Jake himself looked smaller. His Letterman jacket hung loose, his normally cocky slouch replaced by a stiff, almost military posture. His eyes darted across the podium, landing briefly on each girl before skittering away. Principal Harris rushed forward. "This is highly inappropriate. We have a right to face our accusers," the attorney boomed. A beat of silence. Then Rachel, tiny, quiet Rachel, stepped to the edge of the stage. She didn't speak. She simply extended her arm, the fading bruise now documented in 100 photographs. Jake's face drained of color. His mother made a strangled noise. The attorney started spouting legal jargon, but the damage was done. Every camera in the room had captured Jake's reaction. The flicker of recognition, the way his hands curled into fists, not in anger, but in something far more damning: guilt. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag the aftermath. By midnight, hashtag Jake Larson was trending nationwide. The Eastridge School District announced an investigation into how previous complaints have been handled. 3 major universities rescinded Jake's football scholarship offers. His family's attorney held a terse press conference announcing Jake would be taking time for personal reflection. Emily sat on her bedroom floor, surrounded by her mother, Ms. Alvarez, and the core group of girls who had stood with her. Pizza boxes and soda cans littered the carpet. Someone's phone kept buzzing with interview requests. Sarah scrolled through the news on her laptop. "Look at this," she whispered. The screen showed a statement from the state education board. Asterisk mandatory anti-harassment training for all faculty. Revised reporting procedures. A dedicated task force. Asterisk. Mia burst into tears. Emily stared at the screen, numb. This was bigger than Jake now. Bigger than their school. Somewhere another girl was watching this. A girl like Emily had been, shrinking into herself, believing no one would care. Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "You did this." Emily shook her head. Asterisk we asterisk did. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag the letter. It arrived the next morning, slipped under Emily's front door in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside, a single handwritten line. Asterisk you won. Are you happy now? Asterisk. No signature, but Emily knew. She should have felt victorious. Instead, a strange hollow ache spread through her chest. This wasn't about winning. It had never been about winning. She folded the note and tucked it into her desk drawer. Outside, the first real snow of winter began to fall. The courtroom smelled like lemon polish and stale coffee. Emily sat between her mother and Ms. Alvarez on the hard wooden bench, her stomach twisting as the bailiff called the case. State versus Lawrence Jacob Larson. Jake! No, Lawrence now. The name he'd always hated, sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting navy suit, his shoulders hunched forward. His once perfect hair hung limp over his forehead. Behind him, his parents whispered fiercely with their attorney, their designer clothes looking suddenly cheap under the fluorescent lights. The judge adjusted her glasses. Will the prosecution please call their first witness? Assistant District Attorney Ruiz stood. The state calls Emily Carter. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward. Jake's mother made a small, wounded noise. Emily's legs trembled as she walked to the stand. The Bible's leather cover stuck to her sweaty palms as she swore to tell the truth. Ruiz approached. Emily, when did the harassment begin? She looked at Jake. Really looked. The boy who'd terrorized her for years now seemed small. Just a kid. Like her. 7th grade, she said. He tripped me in the cafeteria. Everyone laughed. The questions continued. The stolen homework, the cruel nicknames, the day in the locker room when he'd. Objection! Jake's attorney shouted. Relevance! The judge overruled. Emily kept going, her voice gaining strength with each memory. When she described the slap, several jurors shifted in their seats. One, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, clenched her jaw. Then came the cross-examination. Jake's attorney loomed over her. Isn't it true, Miss Carter, that you've fantasized about revenge against my client for years? Ms. Alvarez squeezed her mother's hand. Emily met the attorney's gaze. I didn't fantasize about revenge. I fantasized about feeling safe. The gallery erupted. The judge banged her gavel. Jake stared at his hands. Hashtag, 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 the defense collapses. The prosecution played Emily's recordings, showed Rachel's bruised photos, called witness after witness. Sarah, Mia, Lila from Jake's old school, even the football coach who'd finally grown a conscience. When the defense's turn came, their case crumbled within minutes. Their character witnesses faltered under Ruiz's questioning. The star quarterback admitted he'd never actually seen Jake respect women. The math teacher who'd written Jake glowing recommendation letters couldn't explain away the security footage. Then Jake took the stand. His attorney led him through rehearsed answers, asterisk misunderstandings, locker room humor, never meant to hurt anyone asterisk, but his voice lacked its usual swagger. When Ruiz approached for cross-examination, Jake's knee bounced uncontrollably. Mr. Larson, Ruiz said mildly, how many times have you been disciplined for inappropriate behavior? Jake's attorney objected. Sustained. Ruiz tried another tack. Do you recall speaking to Principal Harris last October about Emily Carter? A beat. No. Ruiz produced a document. Your sworn statement says you'd never interacted with Emily outside class. Yet here's a detention slip signed by you, Jake, and Principal Harris for harassing Emily in the hallway. Jake's mouth opened. Closed. The jury took notes. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag the verdict. Deliberations lasted 3 days. Emily paced her bedroom, wearing holes in her socks. Sarah and Mia camped in her living room, jumping every time the phone rang. Rachel sent hourly texts. Anything yet? On Thursday morning, the call came. The courtroom felt different this time. Heavier, like the air before a storm. Jake sat perfectly still, his mother gripping his arm so tightly her rings left marks. The jury foreman stood. On the count of misdemeanor assault, we find the defendant. A pause that stretched forever. Guilty. Jake's father cursed. His mother wept. Jake himself just deflated like a balloon with all the air let out. The judge set sentencing for next month. Probation was likely. Maybe community service. No one expected jail time. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Emily, how do you feel? She looked at the girls beside her, Sarah grinning through tears, Mia holding up 2 fingers in a quiet victory sign, Rachel actually smiling for once. Like this was never just about me. Emily said. And for the first time, she believed it. Hashtag the aftermath. The school district settled the Title IX lawsuit out of court. Principal Harris resigned. The football coach was fired. New policies were implemented. Anonymous reporting, mandatory bystander training, real consequences for harassment. Jake transferred to a private school out of state. Rumor had it his parents' marriage was crumbling under the strain. Emily expected to feel triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. Then the letters started coming. Not hate mail, thank you notes. From girls at other schools. From parents. One from a state senator proposing new anti-bullying legislation called Emily's Law. She stacked them carefully in a shoebox under her bed. Some nights, when the memories threatened to swallow her whole, she'd read them by flashlight. Because of you, I told my principal, my daughter finally feels safe. You gave me courage. On the 1-year anniversary of the cafeteria incident, Emily returned to the scene of the crime. The lunchroom looked the same sticky floors, same screeching chairs. But the atmosphere had shifted. A freshman girl waved shyly from across the room. A teacher nodded respect. Even the lunch lady gave her an extra scoop of mashed potatoes. Emily took her old seat in the corner. Only now, she didn't sit alone. 5 years later, Emily Carter stood at the front of a college classroom, shuffling her lecture notes as 20 eager faces watched her expectantly. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver Emily's Law pin on her lapel, a gift from the senator who'd made her story the cornerstone of statewide education reform. Today we're discussing bystander intervention strategies, she said, clicking to the first slide. A familiar photo appeared, the high school cafeteria where everything had changed. Let's start with a real-world example. The students leaned forward. They all knew who she was, of course. Most had read about her case in their orientation packets. But today would be the first time she walked them through it step by step. Her phone buzzed silently in her pocket. A text from Mia, now an art therapist working with trauma survivors. Asterisk, good luck today. Proud of you. Asterisk. Emily took a deep breath and began. Hashtag the ripple effects. Sarah sat in the audience at Emily's first public speaking engagement, bouncing her toddler on her knee. After testifying, she'd gone into social work, specializing in Title IX cases at universities. The baby grabbed at Sarah's lanyard, which bore the logo of the nonprofit they'd founded together. Speak up, stand together. In the third row, Rachel typed furious notes on her laptop between snapping photos for the student newspaper. The once quiet freshman was now a journalism major, her articles on campus safety policies already gaining national attention. And Jake, Emily had made peace with never knowing what became of him, until last month when a handwritten letter arrived with no return address. I'm sorry, just those 2 words. But the postmark told her everything. It had been sent from a substance abuse treatment center 3 states over. She'd tucked it away with the others. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder, people could change. Hashtag the unexpected visitor. After class, an elderly woman waited by Emily's podium. Miss Carter? Her voice trembled. I'm Jake's grandmother. Emily's stomach dropped. The woman didn't look like Jake's parents. Her eyes were kind, her hands worn from decades of teaching kindergarten. I just wanted to thank you, she said, pressing a worn copy of Emily's Law into Emily's hands. What you did, it saved more lives than you know. Tears welled in the old woman's eyes as she confessed. Jake wasn't the first Larson boy to bully his way through school. His father had been worse. His grandfather worse still. But you broke the cycle, she whispered. However, Jake, turns out, you gave him a chance to be better. Emily hugged her. Right there in the empty classroom, 2 women from opposite sides of the same war held each other and wept. Hashtag the last letter. That night, Emily added Jake's apology to her shoebox collection. Then she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Dear Jake, she wrote, I forgive you. She hesitated, then added, now forgive yourself. She mailed it to the treatment center the next morning. Hashtag the circle closes. On graduation day, Emily stood with Sarah, Mia, and Rachel for photos outside the lecture hall, where they'd first met with administrators all those years ago. The building now bore a plaque, Carter Advocacy Center. Remember when we just wanted them to stop laughing at us? Mia joked, adjusting her cap. Emily looked around at the crowd of students, laughing, crying, embracing. So many faces that would never know the fear she'd lived with. That would never have to. She slipped her hand into Sarah's. They're laughing with us now. And as the camera flashed, freezing this perfect moment in time, Emily realized something profound. The quiet girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who would never be silent again.